everybody, and welcome back to my YouTube channel, and welcome to the second episode of Keyframed. Before we get into the meat of this video, obviously I'm standing up today and I'm not sitting down. So basically, I did a poll on my Instagram about 2 weeks ago asking people whether or not they felt like me standing up or me sitting down during videos looked better. So there was about 70 or so people who answered the poll, which was really great to get that many people to participate and give me some feedback. 60% of people said me sitting down looked better, and then 40% of people said me standing up looked better. So what I decided to do with that information is, for all the videos like the breakdown, timeline, that kind of thing, I'm gonna use the sitting down format just because I think it makes more sense. For Keyframed, whenever I'm telling a story or something like that, like I did last episode, I'll still use the sitting down format, but when I'm doing a video like today's, I'm gonna do this kind of standing up framing because I think it looks better and also lets me move around and things like that. So with that being said, we're gonna get straight into the video. Now today's video is gonna be an interesting one, and I think it might be a bit of a controversial one because I know that whenever you put out your opinion on the internet, sometimes people don't like it. I'm gonna be ranking all of the Pixar movies from my least favorite to my favorite. A couple quick clarifications about that because I know that when I pitched this idea to people, there was a little bit of confusion. I'm gonna be focusing on Pixar animated movies. So I know sometimes people tend to think that Disney animated movies, especially the 3D ones, are also Pixar movies, but they're two different things. So movies like Zootopia, Big Hero 6, Raya, Moana won't be in this video because they're not Pixar animated movies. The second thing is a quick reminder that this is going to be my opinion, and my ranking is very, very much emotionally based because I picked movies that I really connect to and that I feel something towards. So some of the movies that I have high on the list might not be as high on your list than I do, and I might have some movies really low on my list that are really high on yours, and that's completely okay. I'm gonna try to give you my reasoning why I put the movie there. I completely get if you don't agree with me. Totally open to debating with you in the comments, as well as if you want to put your own rankings. I'd love to see those. You're allowed to rank the way you want to rank. I'm allowed to rank the way I want to rank. Hopefully that's enough of a precision. Hopefully that makes sense. I'm gonna stop talking and I'm just gonna get straight into the ranking. So I did spend a lot of time trying to think about how I was gonna rank these. I kid you not, I rewrote this list probably 3 to 4 times just because I wasn't happy with a couple of my choices and I kept wanting to try something different. There might be some surprises in there. Hopefully this will be entertaining to watch. At number 24, I have The Good Dinosaur. Now I think this movie is kind of a movie that is largely forgotten in the Pixar universe. This one for me just doesn't hit the same level as the other ones. I think it's a little bit of a weaker story. It's very pretty to look at, but it's not necessarily a movie that I find as entertaining as some other ones, and so it's not a movie that I find myself going back and watching often. At number 23, I have Cars 2. Now, I love the original Cars so much, and I've talked about it in last Keyframed episode. This movie for me was kind of a letdown. I think the story wasn't as strong as the original one. I think the spy aspect didn't really work. I think if they had focused on just the racing, it would have been better. Making Mater the main character here didn't really work because I think Mater works better as a side character that's more there for comic relief, and I think making him the main character was a little bit too much. At number 22, I have A Bug's Life, and I know some people are going to be surprised by that. I know some people love A Bug's Life. For me, the simple reason why it's low on the list is I don't think it's one of Pixar's best. I think it's iconic because of what it did for the animation industry. It was, the beginning of Pixar animation studios. For me, this movie also doesn't benefit from the fact that Ants came out right around the same time. I know allegedly Ants copied A Bug's Life, but we don't really know for sure. I personally prefer Ants, also because I think I got introduced to Ants first, but it doesn't mean that I find this movie bad. It's just for me not as iconic and as good as some of the other ones that are higher on the list. At number 21, I have Finding Dory. Now for me, I love the original Nemo movie. This one, again, was kind of a letdown. I think you'll probably notice a trend that sequels are not very high on my list. I still like this movie a lot. It's kind of funny at times. I think it's a marvel of technology, especially with the octopus character. I just don't think the story is as strong as some of the other ones, and I just don't really feel as much of a connection to this one as I do to some of the other Pixar movies, so that's why it's so low on the list. Number 20, and I think this is probably my first really controversial pick, I have Monsters University. I know a lot of people love this movie a lot. For me, I like this movie a lot. I think it has a good story. I think it's funny. but for me, I just don't have a very deep connection to this movie. This is a movie I'll happily watch with a group of friends if they want to watch this movie, but it's not a movie that I necessarily find myself watching on my own very often. That's why it's so low. At number 19, I have Cars 3. Now for me, this is better than Cars 2, hence why it's slightly higher on the list, but it's not as good as the original. And I think they tried to go back to what worked in the original. It partially works. The third act of the story works really, really well, but I think some parts of the story are kind of weak. One thing that does give it points and why it's higher on the list than some of the other movies, or why you might be surprised to see it higher on the list, is because I love the visuals of this movie. I think it's a movie I remember watching in theaters and being blown away by how cool the visuals looked. Number 18, I have The Incredibles 2. I love the OG Incredibles so much. I think this movie is good. I think visually speaking, it's beautiful. I do think story-wise, the villain is a little bit weak. It's not as good as the original. I think the villain in the original was a little bit better. I think we also had slightly better character plots in the original. Number 17, I have Toy Story 4. I'm not the biggest fan of the Toy Story franchise. I don't hate the Toy Story franchise, but it's just there's other franchises that I prefer, or other movies that I prefer. This one, it looked really beautiful, and when I watched it, I was like, okay, I like what they did with the story. It's pretty good. It's not as good as any of the original three, in my opinion, but it's still a really good story, and I liked how they handled some of the other characters in the movie. At number 16, I have Toy Story 2. It's a really good story. Really like the villain and the plot of the story. For me, like I said, I just don't really feel as deep of a connection with Toy Story as maybe some other kids of my age do. Still enjoy this movie. Happily will go and watch it back whenever. At 15, I have Toy Story 3. This one, for me, I really like because of the ending of this movie. I like that they went darker with this one. I think people had a lot of complaints about that. I think it works really well. I think it's nice to see Pixar experiment with that. Is it Pixar's best? No, but I think it's definitely a very solid movie, and I really enjoy watching it from time to time. At number 14, I have Soul. I really enjoyed watching it the first time through. It was a little bit confusing the first time through with some story points, and I wasn't the happiest about some decisions they made, but I understood by the end of the movie why they made the decisions, and I think it worked. It, for me, was more satisfying to watch it back the second time. I really like that this movie was also focusing on a person of color as the main character. I think that was really, really nice. I could have put it higher, but I think there's just other movies that I feel more of a connection to that are higher on the list. Now, number 13, again, might be a bit of a controversial one, but like I've already explained, I'm not a huge fan of Toy Story. I have Toy Story 1 at 13. I don't have anything against this movie. I don't think there's anything wrong with this movie. For me, I just don't connect to it as much as other kids. It is an iconic movie. It's also the first Pixar movie. It's the reason why 3D kind of became a huge thing. You gotta give it a huge amount of praise for that, and it's a really good movie that I like to go back and watch from time to time. I just don't think I can put it any higher on the list just because just other movies that I prefer. I'm surprised it's low on this list, but at the same time I'm not, just because Toy Story isn't my favorite franchise. At number 12, I have Onward. I think a lot of people find this movie to be very goofy, and when they watch it, they realize, okay, this has a pretty emotional, pretty deep story, and it's a really good one. I really, really was looking forward to this movie, and I wasn't disappointed when I watched it. I really liked the kind of dynamic between the two brothers in the story. It really, really reminded me of my relationship with my own sibling. When we talked about that, we both felt that way as well. And so for that reason, this movie is high on the list, just because I feel a connection to the brother relationship that they have in this movie, and I really, really liked how they portrayed that. At number 11, again, another controversial pick. I'm surprised that this movie isn't higher on my list, but like I said, I went through the list a couple of times to try to optimize it as much as possible, and this movie just ended up lower than I expected. It's Monsters, Inc. I love this movie. It's a movie I remember watching many, many times with my family growing up. I love the characters. There's so many funny moments. I really like the story. For me, the main reason it's not any higher on the list is because there's just other movies that I have a deeper connection to because of something in my own life, and that's the only reason that it's not higher on the list. If those other movies weren't there, it would be so much higher on the list, trust me. Top 10 time. So at number 10, I have Luca. Now, Luca for me was a really great movie. I feel very, very connected to this movie for a couple of reasons. So for those of you who don't know, I grew up in the French Italy/Italian Riviera. And so the landscape and environment and the kind of ambiance of Luca and where it takes place is something that I connect to very deeply because it's what I grew up around. So for me, when I saw this movie, it brought back a lot of nostalgia and memories of my childhood. So it immediately goes up on the list because of that. On top of this, I really like the story. And the other thing is the last scene of the movie is a scene that I cannot watch without tearing up or completely crying because of how much I connect to the characters and what happens in that scene, because something similar happened to me and it just is a very, very emotional thing for me to watch. At number 9, I have Brave. Now, I've seen people put Brave either really low or really high on their list, and for me, it's a movie that just doesn't seem to be appreciated as much as it should. It's a very, very good movie. I think they tried something completely different with this movie, and it worked. It's a beautiful movie. It's very poetic, I think, in the story. It's got a beautiful soundtrack. It's got a great voice cast, and it's really funny as well. There's a lot of really good moments in this movie. For me, this is solid. This 100% needs to be in the top 10, and so that's why I put it at number 9. Number 8, I have Finding Nemo. Now, this is the first Pixar movie I ever went to see in theaters, and I absolutely love this movie. The story is beautiful. Love the soundtrack as well, and it's so iconic. And I still remember the experience of going to see this in theater for the first time. Absolutely love this movie. Totally deserves to be in the top 10. At number 7, I have Up. Now, Up for me was a really, really emotional movie to watch just because the relationship between Carl and Russell is very similar to my relationship with one of my grandparents. Can't watch this movie without really feeling emotional because of that. Especially the first scene for me hits very close to home, and so it just gets me really, really emotional. But I really like this movie. I love the story. I love the characters, and I can go back and watch it whenever. At number 6, this might be a slightly controversial pick. I have Inside Out. Now, the main reason for this is because I fully relate to what it's like moving to a completely new different place. I moved from Europe to the US when I was around Riley's age in the movie. When I saw this in theaters, I felt a really deep connection to this because a lot of the experiences that Riley goes through in this movie are things that I experienced when I moved here. And so for that reason, it's high on the list and it's got a lot of praise for me. I know some people don't like it. For me, I really like it and it's high on my list. Now, top 5 time. At number 5, I have Coco. Now, for me, Coco was such a great movie to watch for the first time. I love the story so much, and I love the musical aspect of this story. I love the world building of this story. It's so good, so beautiful, and I don't know much about Mexican culture, but I really, really like this movie because I feel like I learned so much about Mexican culture in very little time. And I feel like from what I read, it seems like it's really accurate as well. It's hard not to tear up when you watch this movie. At number 4, I have The Incredibles, the original. I love this movie because I love superheroes, so for me, it immediately goes up because of that. I also love the family aspect of this story a lot. I really, really like that. The villain is honestly, in my opinion, the best Pixar villain that has ever been made. Think Syndrome, there's not been a better villain in any Pixar movie. It's so good, and it just, the way it's built, it's so, so good. I actively go back and watch this movie at least like once a month. It's such a good movie. Love this movie. Also, the soundtrack is amazing, but you know, that's an extra plus. I think if you've watched last week's video, you probably won't be surprised by the 3 movies that are in the top 3 because I talked about those 3 movies last week. At number 3, I have the original Cars. Now, for me, I love cars. I grew up in a country where the biggest thing that the country is known for is a motor race. And so for me, this movie was up there. Already being a kid, growing up, loving cars, this movie came out and I was like, whoa, that's Cars, and they're talking and they're like, it's a cool story. And I loved it for that. I love the message of this story and it's such a great movie for me. Absolutely love it. I go back and watch it often. Love the soundtrack. Such a good movie. I could go on and on about it. It's amazing. At number 2, I have Ratatouille, or I should say Ratatouille. This movie for me is such a good one. I think it's one of Pixar's most poetic movies. Love the soundtrack, love the visuals, love the story. I love to cook, and a big reason why is because of this movie. It's such a great movie. I love the message of this movie. That anyone can cook, for me, is such a good message that you're sending out to people. It's, for me, one of the most perfect movies that's been made. I can go back and watch it whenever. I even know parts of the dialogue by heart. That's how much I've seen this movie. Now, number 1, I don't think it's gonna surprise anyone. I have WALL-E. Now, WALL-E for me is literally Pixar's most perfect movie. It's able to tell such a compelling and emotional story with literally no dialogue. The only people who have dialogue are the humans. They play a part to the plot, but like the main characters don't really have dialogue, and they tell the story, they convey the emotion with just facial expressions and also body language, and it's just really, really well done. And for me, I love the score, I love the visuals. It's a movie that I go back and watch very, very often. I even went through one time and watched it, I think, every single day for a whole week. Ratatouille for me is a very close second, but this for me just takes the cake. I'm not a huge fan of romantic movies. I like them, but I'm not a huge fan. This one though, I like the romantic aspect of the story, and I think it's told really, really well. So there we go. That is my ranking. I'm gonna put the full ranking up right now so you can remember what my ranking was if you already forgot some of the placings. Let me know what you think of my ranking, if you have any problems with it, if you have any opinions about it, if you would maybe put movies differently. Let me know what you think. If you want to share your own ranking in the comments, feel free to. I'd love to see where I differ with other people. I'm always open to seeing what other people think, so really, really intrigued and would love to know what you think. With that being said, that is it for today's video. If you enjoyed it, leave a like as well as subscribe if you haven't already. I will be back next week with another video, maybe 2 videos, who knows, we'll see. Until then, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you all in the next video.